Orioles are fighting in the AL East. Not a lot going right. They're playing 500 baseball. They're very injured. Can they stay in this thing? Can they win the division? Can they make a splash in the postseason? We'll try to answer some Orioles questions. Put them in the chat coming up on this live mailbag edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. If you are tuning on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, it is Thursday, September 12th. For those listening afterwards, it is Friday, September 13th, 2024. And as always, I am your host, Connor Newcomb. Welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. With the Orioles having an off day here on Thursday after dropping 2 of 3 in Boston this week with what was a pretty crushing walk-off loss in the 10th inning last night. The O's get the day off as they travel to Detroit, a Tigers team who did lose to the Rockies 4-2, gave up 2 in the 9th on Thursday, but generally has been playing some really good baseball and is still at 75 and 72, finds themselves kind of still in the playoff race for the final wild card spot in the American League. The O's will kick off that series here on Friday night. But with the off day here to finish off the week of the podcast, wanted to do another live mailbag episode. So if you have Orioles questions, it can be anything from the playoff race, from the roster to anything, even heading into 2025. I want to hear them right here. Put them in the chat in the comment section. If you were watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as well. We'll talk about a couple of things going on as well in Oriole land, a couple of news and notes to get to on the final episode of the week. And let's just jump into those first, because we do have some interesting, at least, stuff from Norfolk on Thursday. They are playing in Durham right now. As I record, it's 2-1 Tides in the bottom of the 8th inning. But the important thing is that Trevor Rogers started again for the Tides on Friday night. And I think we are at the point where even if Rogers does come back to the bigs with the Orioles at some point here in 2024, it's probably not going to be making a huge impact. I could certainly see him rejoining the rotation at some point, making maybe at least one spot start, just giving the O's something down the stretch. But they are clearly working on things with the 26-year-old lefty since he has gone down to AAA. And it is hard to look at minor league game logs for a player, especially a guy who's been in the big leagues, especially a guy who they are going through some mechanical adjustments, working with velocity, working with location. It's hard to put that all together and take everything from how he's performing night by night. However, it has been better recently. He had that terrible first start in AAA where he gave up 10 runs. Then he pitched pretty well against Jacksonville, 6 innings of 2-run ball, 5 strikeouts. Then against Charlotte on September 6th, 6 2/3, 3 runs, 9 Ks, and 1 walk. And then tonight against Durham, an always talented AAA team, the Rays affiliate, 6 scoreless innings with 7 Ks for Trevor Rogers. And the even more impressive stuff was when you look even further. 19 swings and misses for Trevor Rogers, including 9 whiffs on 12 swings against his slider against the Durham hitters. Now, again, this is a AAA lineup, not a big league lineup, although there's some former and future big leaguers on that Bulls team, but that is still great stuff. And so the Orioles are working on things. Now, his velocity was down, fastball averaging around 89. He's been more 91 this year and was up to as high as 94 when he was great with the Marlins a couple of years ago. So maybe they're lowering the velocity even further to make sure they can get the command settled and potentially work on the mechanics more and then try to get the velo back this offseason. But either way, those things are good signs for Trevor Rogers, who, again, may not help the Orioles at all in 2024 after that trade from the Marlins at the deadline. But the O's have 2 more years of control. He's not a free agent until after the 2026 season. So the Orioles have some time to figure things out. And it seems like he's on that road to figuring some things out in AAA Norfolk. We also saw Jacob Webb pitch in Norfolk. He threw a scoreless 7th. It is his 4th rehab outing, 3 of them in AAA, and 1 has been in AA. The O's are still kind of saying we're waiting for him to bounce back. His velocity was a little bit better. He was more sitting 93. In his last outing, he was kind of topping out 93, was more 91, 92. We're used to 93 to 95 on Webb's fastball, so he's still not all the way there, but the velocity is increasing. He's got good command on his sweeper and his changeup from the inning he threw on Thursday. So that is certainly another step forward for Jacob Webb to potentially be rejoining the Oriole bullpen. At this point, his earliest return would probably be Saturday or Sunday, and I would think it probably pushes into next week before he's back. But getting him back would be a huge boost to this Orioles pen. Those are kind of the updates that I have. Let's pop into some questions. Again, put your questions in the chat here on YouTube if you would like them answered here on this live Locked on Orioles mailbag question. Let's see. AllStarSky has our first question of the day, who wants to know if the Orioles end up playing in the wild card, who is the ideal opponent in the American League? So if the O's end up in the wild card, that means they don't win the division. And there is still a chance that if the Orioles don't win the division, they could end up having to go on the road. Remember, the way the new playoff system works with the 6 teams getting in, the top 2 division winners each get a bye directly into the ALDS. One of them was the Orioles last year. And the final 4 teams, the worst division winner record-wise, and then the 3 wild card teams all end up playing in the wild card round, which is a best 2 out of 3 series with all 3 games being played at the better team's ballpark or the better seeded team's ballpark. So the number 3 seed, the last division winner, plays the last wild card team, the 6th seed, and then the top wild card plays the number 2 wild card, 4 versus 5. So right now, where the O's are in the standings, they would be set up to host the wild card series as the number 4 seed, and they would, at this point, if it ended right now, host the Kansas City Royals. Now, they are 3 games up on Kansas City right now. They are 4.5 up on the Minnesota Twins, who have the final wild card. And then at the moment, they are 8 games up on the Detroit Tigers, who are the first team out of the playoff picture. So again, I know the O's have been struggling, but they've got over a 99% chance to make the postseason. They're going to be in, but you still got to think about a little bit. Can they hold on to that top wild card? And that's going to be important to play that home series. Now, if you're looking at the wild card and you're looking at the divisions, things could still change. Cleveland has a 4.5 game lead on Kansas City right now in the AL Central. The Royals could certainly make that up, but I'm going to go ahead and say the Guardians win that division. And the Astros have a 4-game lead on the Mariners, so I'm going to go ahead and say the Astros win that division. So if the Yankees do win the East, then it's the Yankees, we'll say probably as the 1 seed, Cleveland is the number 2 seed, and Houston as the 3 seed. So Houston would host the final wildcard team, and then let's say the O's do get the 4. You're most likely looking at Kansas City, but you can also throw the Twins as a team in the mix. And then, I mean, Tigers, Red Sox, Mariners are all within 4 games of the final wild card, so we'll throw them in there too. So we're going to say those 5 teams are the potential opponents. Number 1 I would most like to play is the Detroit Tigers. I know they've been playing better baseball as of late, but in terms of just talent on the roster, that's the worst team out of those 5. Next up would be the Seattle Mariners. I know how good that rotation is and how scary it could be in a 3-game series, but that offense is just so dreadful, and they're just not playing good baseball if they somehow snuck in. Next would be the Twins. Twins are kind of a good all-around team, but they don't do anything amazing. They have some injuries they're dealing with. They're really skidding even worse than the Orioles right now, and the O's seem to play well against Minnesota. I would be fine with that series. Then it would be the Boston Red Sox. You know, the O's had won 6 straight series against Boston until what happened this week at Fenway. That's a team that's starting pitching is really falling off. Their bullpen's really falling off, but they have a great offense. Now, I'd be fine with playing the Red Sox at Oriole Park. There's really no chance that series would end up being at Fenway, but that team still does scare me with their offense. And then really the last team I'd like to play is the team the O's are set up to play right now. That is the Royals. The O's did win both series, 2 out of 3 against Kansas City this year, but it's a scrappy team. Bobby Witt could win MVP. I mean, the top 3 in that rotation is really, really good, especially with Reagans and Lugo at the top. And then you can go to Brady Singer and you can go to Michael Wacha, and that bullpen, they got a lot better at the trade deadline. Their lineup still isn't great. The Orioles, if you're putting all the wild card teams together, the Orioles are the best team out of all of them and would be favored in that series. But that's how I'd rank them most and least likely that I would at least want to play in this series. Carol with a question here. What do you think the chances are that the Orioles turn things around here at the end of the regular season? I mean, it's kind of a broad question. It depends on what you think turning things around are. The O's have 15 games left. I would maybe say, you know, if they go 10-5, that's much more on pace with what they did early in the season. I would call going 10-5 and winning the AL East turning things around at the end of the year. So I'd say there's like a 1 in 3 chance, right? They're not playing great baseball, but they certainly have the talent to do it where they can get things back in the direction they would like to see them moving. Birdland 101 with a question. What is your projection of pitching moving closer to the postseason? Who's projected to come off the injured list or move up? Well, the hope is that the Orioles will get everyone that is injured back off the IL. And pitching wise, the guys that could come back, it's really 3 big names. It is Grayson Rodriguez, Jacob Webb, and Danny Coulomb. Now, I just talked about Webb. He has made his 4th rehab appearance, seemingly getting close to the big leagues. Coulomb made his first rehab appearance in AAA on Wednesday. Grayson Rodriguez has not gone on rehab yet, but he is throwing bullpens. He threw a side session on Wednesday as well, so he is working his way back. There's questions about all 3 and when they would be back and how ready they'd be for the postseason, but I think at the very least, it seems like all 3 will be on the playoff roster, which is a good thing. Now, if we're looking at the Orioles' current roster and saying, okay, if all 3 of these guys do return in the regular season, what would be the moves that the Orioles make? Let's say Danny Coulomb is the first one back. That would be my guess right now. Probably Cole Irvin gets DFA'd. He's not really pitching much at all. They've done it once already this season, and you would be able to get a lefty to replace him in Danny Coulomb. Next up would probably be Jacob Webb. I just think the Birch Smith thing has kind of run its course, and Birch Smith has options. So you don't have to DFA him. You can just send him to AAA and replace him with Jacob Webb. And then the last one with Grayson Rodriguez, that's one where it would be a much tougher decision as you got closer and closer. But honestly, if Grayson's fine to start at a regular level, you're probably just optioning Cade Povich back down to AAA because Grayson would take his spot in the rotation. However, if Grayson needs to do more piggybacking and you do need all 6 starters and need to keep Cade Povich around, that's where it gets tricky, and maybe it's a Keegan Aiken option or a Matt Bowman DFA that comes into play. The only other guy I could see maybe coming back, maybe Trevor Rogers, who pitched well tonight. That's certainly a possibility. Or a guy like Colin Selby, who was really good in those 2 appearances with the O's before getting sent down at the end of August. Those moves would probably be because someone got injured. The only way I could see the O's doing it, if they did just decide at some point to cut the ties with Craig Kimbrell, that is where Colin Selby could potentially come into play. But keep getting those questions in here on this live mailbag edition of the podcast. We'll continue to answer them coming up after this break. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Tonal. What is Tonal? Well, it's a way to get your fitness going, because when life gets busy, fitting in a workout can be stressful. But with Tonal, you can get efficient workouts personalized just for you, and they're available with the amount of time that you have. Tonal is the world's smartest and most effective strength training system that helps get you stronger. Powered by AI, Tonal learns with every rep, so it can deliver workouts personalized for you. It's like having a personal trainer at home with you, as Tonal will optimize every workout just for you. And right now, Tonal is offering our listeners $200 off your Tonal purchase with promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Tonal.com and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off your purchase. That's Tonal.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off. So we are back here on a live edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast, live mailbag edition. Remember, put your questions in the chat here. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Got another question from Carol to get through here. What do you think morale is like right now in the Orioles locker room? Do they get along? Are they supporting each other? Or is it every man for himself? Well, it's hard to say that because I'm not in that locker room, but you've heard some pretty candid quotes from Orioles players over the past few days where they still feel like they are pretty well put together as a team. These guys seem to really like each other, but they have talked about that, hey, winning adds to morale and losing takes away from morale. And while the Orioles have been mostly a 500 team for 2 to 3 months now, so it's kind of an even split of winning and losing. When you're a team that won as much as they did last year, won as much as they did at the beginning of this year to get to 20 games over 500, even becoming more of a 500 team for a long stretch feels like a lot more losing than the winning. So it's going to take a hit to the morale. And the Orioles players have been pretty candid about that. I don't think it's anything where it's ripping this clubhouse apart. I just think it's what happens when your team is playing essentially below what they think they should be and performing worse than they know they should be. That's going to take a hit to morale. I don't think it's going to be anything that's detrimental to this team in the postseason, but it's nice that the guys have been pretty honest about what is going on in that room and what needs to change for them to turn things around here. AllStarSky with a question. Do you think if the Orioles don't make any noise in the playoffs, does that put Brandon Hyde on the hot seat? I really don't think so. Mike Elias is going to stay in this role, and he is a big believer in Brandon Hyde. These players seem to be big believers in Brandon Hyde and this coaching staff. He's done a great job managing that clubhouse. Baseball managers in 2024 are really kind of middle managers. The GMs and the front office staff are making a lot of the decisions, and the players out there are putting them into place and winning and losing baseball games. The managers make some lineup choices, not a lot of them, mostly done by the GM. They make, some bullpen changes, some pitching changes. They might do some pinch hitting, but they're really keeping that clubhouse together. And as long as Brandon Hyde hasn't lost this clubhouse, which I don't think is the case, he's helped with his amazing turnaround. He's been a great middle manager, it seems. I think the Orioles would stick with him, especially if you're getting to the playoffs. Back-to-back years, the Orioles have not, especially even if the O's win the AL East and flame out in the playoffs. I mean, the O's haven't won back-to-back divisions in 40 some that'd be a pretty good accomplishment. Brandon Hyde's going to keep his job unless something crazy were to happen and he loses the clubhouse as well. Here's Golfer with a question. Who do you think will pitch for the Orioles in the playoffs, and what are the chances that they get the bye? FanGraphs has the Orioles at like 25 to 30% right now to win the division. I would maybe put it around that. Let's say 1/3. I'd say 33% to win the division and get that bye. Again, if they do win the AL East, they are going to be one of the top 2 seeds and get that bye to the ALDS. It'd be tough for them to win the division and have the Astros catch them for one of those top 2 spots. It's still a better chance for the Yankees. They have an easier schedule and they have a 1.5 game lead. I broke down the schedules for both teams on Thursday's episode of the pod. So if you want to go back and check that one out, I did the full breakdown there. But yeah, it's going to be tough for the Orioles to win this division. Now, in terms of who will pitch for the Orioles in the playoffs, a lot is going to be decided by the health of Grayson Rodriguez. How early can he come back? Will he be 100% ready to go when he comes back? Will he come back as a piggyback guy and a reliever versus will he fully come back as a starting pitcher? That is going to answer a lot of those questions. But I will tell you, without Grayson, Corbin Burnes and Zach Eflin will be 1 and 2 in the Orioles playoff rotation. We know that. Hopefully, Grayson Rodriguez is healthy and number 3. And then basically Albert Suarez / Dean Kramer is your number 4 options. You do not need more than 4 starters in the postseason. I would lean Albert Suarez, but Dean Kramer's been pitching so well lately. Really, both of them have been pitching so well lately that they're giving the Orioles some good options. Now, we know how poorly it went for Dean Kramer in the postseason last year, but it also went poorly for Grayson Rodriguez, and I would completely trust him in a playoff spot as long as he is back and healthy by the end of the year. So those would be your starters. And whether it's Suarez or Kramer getting the number 4 spot, the other guy I think would at least move into the playoff bullpen, and they try to use that guy as a weapon in some way, shape, or form. Next question is from Thomas. Talked about it a little bit. What are the chances that Westberg, Grayson, and others can be here for a possible playoff push? Grayson Rodriguez is definitely a question. I believe that was Wednesday's episode. It was one episode this week where I broke down the Grayson Rodriguez timeline. And while I think it's likely that he pitches in the postseason for the Orioles, I talked about how it could be a little less likely that he fully rejoins the rotation and is like ready to 100% rock and roll, throw 100+ pitches in 7 innings in the playoffs if they need it. Just because he hasn't gone on rehab yet, he's still throwing side sessions. I mean, even if he goes on a rehab assignment by the end of this weekend or early next week, the timeline to get him back to the big league rotation at best gives him 1 regular season start before the regular season is over, and then you get to the postseason. So that could be tough for that timeline, like I talked about. He's going to be back in some way, even if it's just he's limited and you have to use him as like a multi-inning reliever in the playoffs. The O's are still going to do that because he's got some of the best stuff on this team. And if he's healthy enough to be on the roster, he is going to help the Orioles in the playoffs. In terms of Westberg, I think it's even better news. I mean, he was taking grounders and throwing with that broken right hand at Fenway Park this week before the game. He's been playing catch. Orioles said he will take batting practice, quote, sometime soon. So hopefully that's maybe this weekend in Detroit. He can take some BP and see how it feels from there. For Westberg, I would still say it's probably going to be a couple more weeks before he could be back. but it's not like a starting pitcher where you have to come back and build it all the way back up. Once he's ready to go and activated, I mean, I hope Westberg can at least play in a couple of regular season games before the year ends, but I'm very confident Westberg will be good to go, at least to be in that postseason lineup, which should be a huge boost for the Orioles. Other guys like Webb and Coulombe, unless they have setbacks, should be okay. Heston Kjerstad is playing rehab games, so as long as he's passing concussion tests, he'll be a factor here in a week or so, be re-added to the roster. That'll be nice for the O's. The big question for me is Ryan Mountcastle. Ramon Urias seems to be progressing well. We haven't really heard anything positive on Mountcastle. His season could maybe be over. I mean, I know he's still got 15 games in the playoffs, but he seems to have the most negative outlook on his injury right now. Let's see. Next question. Another one from Birdland 101. In terms of veterans, Cedric Mullins, Ryan Mountcastle, Anthony Santander, Jorge Mateo versus the new talent, Jackson Holliday, Colt Cowser, Heston Kjerstad versus the sophomores, Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson. Who will lead this team moving forward? Well, if you're talking about talent leading, it's going to be Gunnar Henderson. He is by far the best player on this team. But if you're talking about more of a clubhouse leadership situation, it feels like Gunnar and Adley can take over that role in kind of a passive way. And then you're still going to have Cedric Mullins here for another year. I'm unsure about Ryan Mountcastle and Jorge Mateo being back. But if they do re-sign Anthony Santander, that's a guy who I think can really step into a leadership role. And even Colton Cowser, I know the silliness is what he's most known for, but he's enough of a vocal guy, it would seem, that could maybe kind of take that clubhouse leadership role over as well. John with a good question here. What has been the most detrimental injury to the team this year overall? He said, my pick would be Kyle Bradish or Felix Bautista. I'm not going to say Felix only because we knew he wasn't going to pitch this year. He sustained the injury last August. He got the Tommy John surgery last September. We knew the whole time he was going to be out for 2024. So while losing him certainly hurts, we at least were prepared for it. The pick we were not prepared for is Kyle Bradish, and that is my clear away answer. I mean, he finishes fourth in Cy Young voting last year. Burns, Bradish, Rodriguez, 1, 2, 3 would have just been diabolical if the O's had that all year, and they didn't. Missing Kyle Bradish has been just a key loss for this team, and that is easily, for me, that is the toughest loss for the O's. Keep getting those questions into the chat, though. We will continue to answer them coming up right after this break. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. For me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How do you play Prize Picks? Well, you download the app, and then all you do is pick more or less. That's it. On anywhere from 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you watch the winnings roll in. And the best part about football every weekend, one Caleb Williams passing yard. I know he wasn't great in his debut, but one passing yard gets you a win on Prize Picks every week in September. You just need 4 wins to win money sometimes. 4 correct picks, and you're getting one free one. You can't pass that up because you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. So get that Caleb Williams win in there. And you can do your lineup in 60 seconds. Super easy. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed at Prize Picks. Run your game. So it is a live mailbag episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Thank you everyone who has joined us so far and gotten your questions in. We got time for a few more questions, so continue to put them in the chat if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Let's see, Birdland again with a question. Obviously, we're slumping, and that is true. What position players will lead this team? Well, beside Gunnar Henderson, who has been swinging the bat well, Adley Rutschman in Boston had one of his best series offensively in a long time. Hopefully that can help him turn the corner. And I think him and then Cedric and Gunnar being hot could help to lead this team. Joe with a question here. Let's ask the rough questions. What goes on a ballpark hot dog? For me, it is ketchup and mustard. Pretty simple. You get the ketchup, you get the mustard, and you go to town. That is pretty much it. And Joe also asked, who do you root for in the hot dog race? I pull for mustard. I put both on the dog, but I feel like there's more ketchup fans than mustard, so I root for the underdog, and I take mustard in the race. Thomas with a question, will they bring Albert Suarez back next season? Thomas, I have some good news for you because of just how the contract situations work out with Suarez getting the minor league deal and how much time that he had in terms of service time at the big league level when he was with the Giants before going over to Korea and Japan and then returning to the Orioles. I could be wrong depending on how his minor league deal works out, and he's not going to have minor league options, so you can't just freely send him to AAA. But Albert Suarez, if Fangraphs isn't lying to me in terms of service time, if the O's keep him around, would not be a free agent until after the 2028 season. That would be 4 more years after this of Albert Suarez. Now, who knows if he can keep this up for 4 more years? Again, you have to take into effect that he is 34 and will turn 35 in October, so maybe you don't get 4 more years out of it, but they have him back next year if they want him back. And after this, they are certainly going to want him back. Dennis with a question here. This is actually kind of an interesting one. Are we rooting for the Yankees to win or for the Red Sox to win? That is because the Yankees and the Red Sox starting a 4-game series tonight at Yankee Stadium. Last time I checked, it was a 1-1 ball game. Danny Jansen had a solo home run. Looks like it's 1-1 in the bottom of the 6th. The Yankees have a couple of runners on. We are clearly rooting for the Yankees. Now, I know the Red Sox are right in there in the wild card race. They are 4 games back of the final wild card. But if you look at it this way, the Orioles are 8.5 games up in total on the Boston Red Sox, and there are 3 teams between Baltimore and Boston. The chances are so low of the Red Sox actually catching the Orioles. While the O's are a game and a half back of the Yankees, you are absolutely rooting for the Red Sox in these 4 games, and hopefully they can split or maybe take 3 of 4 and give the Orioles another solid chance to potentially still win this division. See another question here from Joe with Danny and Jacob Webb. Danny Coulombe and Jacob Webb healthy. Predict your postseason bullpen. Good question from Joe. I'll just predict the whole postseason pitching staff in general because it's a little easier that way to see, okay, here would be the starters because you only need 4 of them, and then who would be that extra guy in the bullpen. So as long as Grayson Rodriguez is healthy and ready to go, my 4 starters in the postseason would be Corbin Burnes, Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, and Albert Suarez. Now, I would still have Dean Kramer on the roster, so technically he would be the first guy in the bullpen, but if they needed a long man, needed another starter, whatever, Dean Kramer is pitching so well right now, he makes the roster in that spot. So you have 9 relief spots. Dean Kramer takes 1. Sir Anthony Dominguez is your closer. He obviously takes 2. Yennier Cano has been a great setup man. He takes 3. If we're saying Webb and Coulombe are back, they are certainly postseason worthy. That is 5. Cionel Perez for now has been Brandon Hyde's high leverage lefty. That takes you to 6. Gregory Soto's been up and down. He's been better lately, and the stuff is just so good. You have to put him on that roster. So that is number 7. Then you get to the interesting questions. You've got some lefties in there already with Perez and Soto and with Danny Coulombe. Do you want to keep Keegan Aiken? Really, you have 2 spots, and you're thinking about Keegan Aiken, Matt Bowman, Craig Kimbrell, Birch Smith, potentially Cole Irvin, and then, maybe someone like a Colin Selby from AAA. Those are the guys you are looking at. My guess right now is that Matt Bowman continues to be kind of nasty, and he makes the team. And then, Selby, Aiken, and Kimbrell. Man, y'all are going to hate this one, but I'm going to say Craig Kimbrell. I know it's been terrible just with that strikeout stuff. Maybe I could totally see Kimbrell finishing the season with the team and then they just leave him off the playoff roster. It's hard to, it's just Colin Selby and Keegan Aiken. It's not like it's the greatest relievers in the world, but I feel like it's enough lefties to keep Kimbrell and just, I don't know. Yeah, that's going to be my pick. It'll probably change when I do my first postseason roster projection. Question here from Henry. I'm not sure I understand why John Means had to undergo Tommy John surgery again when he just had the surgery, had no real additional pitches on his arm. Was there a problem with the surgery? It just retore. It can happen. You're getting the implant in there. You're now getting the brace as well. It's happened to guys before. It'll happen again. It might be a little more of an issue for Means than other guys in terms of a re-tearing. He just retore that ligament that was repaired and needs to get surgery again. It happens to people in many different ligaments in their body, and it happened to Means, and it stinks, but it can happen. Pitching is not something the body is supposed to do, and yet pitchers do it. And that is unfortunately what sometimes happens. Let's see. We've got time for a couple more questions here. Let's see. We get the question, do they re-sign Corbin Burnes? I'm still seeing probably about a 5% chance there. We're getting that question from a lot of people. Do they re-sign Santander? Here's Adley Rutschman. Not sure this is the actual Adley Rutschman. That'd be cool if it was. He's wondering. He wants his buddy Santander back on the team. Will the Orioles re-sign Santander? And if so, how much, how long? I hope yes. I think yes. Maybe they can get him to take a shorter big money deal in like the 2-year, $50 million range and just keep him around for a couple more years and then let him walk after that. I think they got to do whatever it takes, honestly, to get Anthony Santander on this team. If they're willing to go maybe 3 years, $60 million to keep him around, I would absolutely do a deal like that. He might get offered really big money from someone else, and maybe the Orioles aren't willing to match it. But with David Rubenstein in charge, they absolutely should be able to match that and absolutely should be willing to match that because, listen, Santander's hit 41 homers. He has dragged this offense along at some times this year. He is the middle of the order power bat that has been huge for this Orioles lineup all season long for multiple years. And there could be some drop-off coming as he gets, on the other side of 30, but you can't just let Santander walk with the production that he has had and that he still can do. He can still play right field out there for the O's. Not a guy you can just let walk away. We'll say final question is from Chris here. Who is your dream free agent signing this offseason for the Orioles? Now, the dream would be Corbin Burnes to bring him back. It could still happen, but he's already on the team, so let's maybe switch it up a little bit. A dream would also be a guy named Juan Soto. You may have heard of him. That's probably not going to happen. My dream that's a little more realistic is Max Fried. Max Fried, he's had a couple of injuries recently, but been such a good left-hander, would play perfectly in Oriole Park. He's not going to cost like that Burnes, Garrett Cole, Blake Snell type money. I think he'll be a little cheaper than that on the free agent market. He's still not super old. He would be just a dynamite addition to this Orioles rotation. I would love to see Max Fried in an Orioles uniform. That'll do it, though, for this live mailbag episode. Thank you so much for everyone who jumped in to ask some questions here. That'll do it for the mailbag. Orioles and Tigers this weekend, Friday, 6:40. It's Zach Eflin on the hill for the O's, TBD for the Detroit Tigers. Let's look at Saturday. It is at 6:10. That's Corbin Burnes versus TBD. And then on Sunday, it's Cade Povich at 12:10. That's another early game against Kader Montero, who has had an interesting season. He hasn't been very good, but he also just threw a complete game shutout his last time out against the Rockies. Best news, though, for the Orioles is Tarik Skubal pitched today on Thursday, which means Skubal is not pitching. The AL Cy Young frontrunner will not be pitching for the Tigers this weekend in Detroit. And because Skubal pitched today, if you kind of look at how the schedule plays out for Detroit, the Orioles also play the Tigers next weekend at Oriole Park. It might be lining up where Skubal doesn't pitch in that series either. That would be a huge win for the O's if they could avoid him in both, but we do know that he will not pitch this weekend. And I love Tarik Skubal, but I love watching him against other teams and not the Baltimore Orioles. But that'll do it for today and this week on the pod. I'll be back on Monday recapping everything you need to know from the weekend series, a big weekend series in Detroit between the Orioles and the Tigers, and as well be cheering on the Red Sox at Yankee Stadium this weekend. But back Monday. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.